evening, everyone. How are you this evening? Yeah, everybody knows Kevin. He and his daughter went to Guatemala to do some hiking. I don't know what happened to Birgit. What happened to you, Birgit?
I was working.
Work. Good, making money so they could go. So I'll turn it over to Kevin for Guatemala.
Great, thanks, Larry. A few words about how this trip came about. Quite a while ago, the family used to go on ski holidays in the winter. We'd go down, take the kids, and go to Utah, go to Salt Lake City, go to Jackson, and had a lot of fun. And then one year our friends were going down to a tropical destination, so we decided we'd try that. That was a blast. That was Belize, which I've shown here actually. And somebody said to me, like, what's going on, Kevin? Like, you're not the kind of guy that I picture sitting on a beach or something like that, your typical tropical holiday. What's going on? Are you getting soft or what? And I said, well, no, I'm going with the flow here. As long as I have snorkeling, something like that to keep me occupied, I'm good. Family's happy. But, if it was up to me, I'd be volcano climbing in Guatemala or something. I remember tossing that out, and it was just some little memory I had, probably by reading a travel book about someplace in Guatemala, somewhere in Central America, that had some really cool volcanoes. It was around this huge lake inland, and it was just amazing hiking and climbing, but it was really dangerous because you could get robbed there. So that kind of stuck in my mind. So fast forward to last year, Natalie, our oldest daughter, she was in fourth year university at UNBC. And we were Skyping with her one day, and she said, hey Dad, you know all that money you saved up for my education and all the scholarships that I got to kind of offset that? There's got to be money left. We should go spend it on a trip. And, we laughed and everything, and then I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, maybe she's serious. So I talked to her a couple of days later, and she was very serious. So I said, no problem. You make a short list, I'll make a short list, and we'll figure out a place to go. We'll get that money spent. The poster actually says presented by Birgit and Kevin Sharman, Kevin and Birgit Sharman. That's not actually true because, as you just heard, Birgit wasn't there. She might have wanted to be there, but I asked Natalie, it's your trip, basically, what do you prefer? She said, well, let's just you and I go, Dad. I was very happy that she would actually spend 2 weeks with me without me driving her crazy. I think that's a success as a parent right there, so I was pretty happy to hear that. Birgit was not happy to hear the outcome of that.
Probably not happy you're saying it.
I think she's come to terms with it. I'll find out after this, I guess.
Took me a while.
Okay, let's go on with the show here. So, where is it? It's basically the first country south of Mexico in Central America. Definitely third world. The countries down there, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, they're third world. They're not too prosperous. Costa Rica is the exception to that. It's doing quite a bit better than these countries, but yeah, definitely a wild place. I kind of had this in mind maybe from reading that travel book one day. It had a lot of really cool city names. Like, I just remembered one, Huehuetenango and Chichicastenango. And it just sounded so cool. I thought, I'm going to have to go there. So here's a look on the left-hand side, a relief map. Jody could make one of these, I'm sure, in no time flat. You can see the country's really rugged. There's a coastal plain on the south part facing the Pacific, and most of the country in the middle part of it is really mountainous. And the right-hand side shows all the major volcanoes. So that was an attraction. We started, the drag. We started reading about all the volcanoes there, and Birgit and I, she was invited on this one, had gone to the Azores the year before that, and that was a volcanic area, and found it really, really fascinating, and climbed one of them there. There were a couple of them actually. So kind of realized that that's a really good hiking destination, is places that they have volcanoes that are preferably not too active anyway. So, you go to the third world, you expect some hiccups along the way, you can't be too concerned about schedule. Actually, the first delay, which kind of messed up the start of the trip, was definitely a first world delay. We got from Grand Prairie to Edmonton first thing in the morning, and then got off the plane in Edmonton and realized that our flight had been delayed by 8 hours. So we weren't. The attraction of going to Guatemala was we could do it all in one day, even from Grand Prairie, which surprised me. Usually going anywhere exotic like that, you're going east, you're overnighting in Toronto, and then you're going down somewhere. So it's a day and a half trip kind of thing. But this looked great on paper, but it didn't quite work out that way thanks to United Airlines. So we got as far as Houston that night by midnight, had some luggage problems, et cetera, et cetera. Got about 4 hours sleep, got the rest of the way, ended up going through Miami, I think, and got to Guatemala City. We had a room booked in Guatemala City for the previous night, but we had to cancel that. So we got there 2 in the afternoon, I think, about almost a full day later than we expected. But we wanted to get out of Guatemala City as soon as we could. It's an extremely rough city. It's about, I think, over 1 million people, and it's one of the highest murder rates of any city in the world, I think. So it doesn't represent the rest of Guatemala. You just basically have to transit through there and get the heck out as fast as you can. So we went to the city of Antigua, which is about an hour away from Guatemala City. And we had planned to be there that day anyway. We just got there quite a bit later. But it was kind of a schedule crunch because we had booked this volcano climb for the next morning. So we got there at 4 in the afternoon. And when I say next morning, I mean we left at 3 in the morning for this volcano climb. So we basically had enough time to walk around, check into our place, walk around the streets, get some money, get some food, and get prepped for this extremely early morning. So it was a bit of a blur. We got picked up. This was a guided trip. Got picked up and transported about an hour away from the town to the base of the mountain. The mountain is called Acatenango. Quite a high one, actually. It's a little over 13,000 feet, almost 4,000 meters. And to put that in perspective, that's higher than Mount Robson by 50 feet or something. So it's definitely thin air country, kind of like last week's show. So we headed off. We met up with our guide, Juan, who's a local village guy. We got dropped off by a minivan guy. Headed off in the dark through farmers' fields, up these trails. We didn't really know where we were. We were going by headlamp. It was all kind of ethereal. The reason why you want a guide there is twofold. One is there's a lot of intersecting trails, especially at the bottom of these climbs. The other reason is for security. I mean, it's not like there are robbers around every corner, but there are some places that tourists are targeted. So definitely want to have a guy who knows the area along with you. So we climbed and we climbed and we climbed. This climb is 1,500 vertical meters. So pretty much 2 pinnacle peaks back to back is a good analogy for that. So a good stiff climb and virtually no flat spots along the way. So we climbed, we were blurry, it was blurry, and dawn broke, and it was really cool because as soon as it got bright out, and as you know in the tropics it gets light and dark pretty fast, the birds came out. It was just like a different experience at all. Sun comes up, and then we're getting into this kind of out of jungle-y type terrain, at least we could tell from the dark, into a pine forest, which was really interesting. Not the kind of thing you'd associate with being that far south. And start to see the views off to the sides. Really, really rugged, of course, with volcano after volcano. Natalie looking slightly dazed here. Some of the people who go up the mountain camp overnight and then make a push for the summit the next morning. And I think there's advantages to that, but I really, really wouldn't have wanted to haul an overnight pack up where we went. It was too far. But once we got kind of into a groove there's some really nice scenery along the way. But at this point, it's probably 3,000 meters here, and the air is definitely getting thinner. You're stopping, catching your breath, and then within 100 meters, you're wheezing again. So you just had to get used to that. You had to slow down till you can go at a steady pace. So here's Juan in the foreground. Quite a character. He spoke a few words of English, but that was about it. He had on rubber boots, dress pants from the thrift store, and he started out with 2 hoodies, which I couldn't believe because at the start we were basically down to t-shirts in no time, sweating. It was pretty humid. Yeah, he's got one hoodie off, he's carrying the other hoodie. He's got a big machete there, and the guy ahead of him is another guide. I could hear him talking Spanish. I know a little bit of Spanish. So do those guys speak Spanish? Oh, a little bit, they said. The guy furthest away from the camera is an Australian guy who's just come from the summit with his guide. He was loving it. So this is Volcan Agua, which is kind of right above the city of Antigua, but a really good view of it. It's a classic, cartoon-shaped volcano. It's just the perfect symmetrical Fuji-type silhouette. So we're getting above tree line here, which is, again, a weird concept for the tropics, but it's high enough to both be, actually cool up there, plus obviously it's pretty fresh from volcanic activity. And some really nice rugged country off in the distance. And the reason why you get up so early is not for fun, let me tell you. It's to beat the clouds as they roll in over the volcano. So, you could leave at 7 and you'd probably be skunked. You'd probably get up about at tree line as the fog rolled in. So even though it is kind of a little hard to fathom getting up that early for these trips. It's kind of like if anyone's worked night shift, you just know it's half psychological if nothing else. As long as you get some sleep during the day, you're good. So up and up, it's getting kind of cindery and not too bad for footing, but really, really thin air up there. So we're on top. And Natalie's distracted here a bit because to the side of this Acatenango is Volcan Fuego, which is an active volcano which basically spews ash regularly like Old Faithful. So that's the chief attraction to go to the top there, other than it's a really nice climb, is you have a front row seat to these eruptions that are pretty regular. They're far enough away so that you won't need to catch one with your bare hands or anything, a rock. So we brought this special epic bar for up there, and it was definitely an epic climb. So we cracked that open. And then, we'd rumble away, and you'd see it first, and then you'd hear the sound. And you look close, you could see rocks flying through the air, like, probably boulders the size of the table, landing on the slopes of the volcano in a big ash cloud. So it was really, really impressive, both as a geologist and just as a spectator. So we were very impressed. From time to time, the volcano gets really active and actually spews out lava. Especially, there's some good pictures at night. Sometimes there's a webcam trained on the volcano, which I still look at every once in a while for old time's sake. Pretty bare, all that ash and cinders. So Juan there is kicking back. He's done this countless times. So he's happy to just rest while you check out the scenery, and whenever you want to go, he'll go with you. And the fog kind of boils up from the valley. It really adds to it as long as it doesn't obscure your views. As long as you get up there in time to have a good look around, it kind of adds to the ambience of it. So Natalie, I think she's adjusting her hairband here, but she could well have been holding her head because we got the classic mild altitude sickness. At that elevation for a day trip like that, typically you get a headache more, that later that day or in the evening. And she had actually a pounding headache that night, but well worth it, she figured. Down this loose stuff, this was really hard to come up. It's just like climbing up ski slopes of rocks, but even worse. So I was really surprised to see a loop in here that looked pretty well identical to the ones we have here. I didn't think those occurred that far south. I guess it's up in the Alpine, really, so why not? Back at this is a group of Japanese folks, it looked like, back at their camp. And we went down and down and down, and because we climbed half of it in the dark, we didn't realize how far we'd come up. Down through the jungle part, which was quite nice with the sun on it. And then down into the fields. Corn is the lifeblood of Guatemala and most of those Central American countries. It's the staple food stuff, and they really depend on it. So there's Juan leading us in the last little bit. And it still hasn't clouded in all around, so we lucked out. It's probably only 9:30 at this point. An accelerated day. So Juan lived right at the very foot of the trail with his family, so his son came up to meet him. And it was kind of cute because if you look, he's got his own little machete. But really nice guy, all smiles. We met his family and shook their hands and met Grandpa and everything. So really good local contact experience. So there's Juan. Guatemalans by and large are quite short. I'm only 5'10", Natalie's 5'7" or 5'8", but this guy's a powerhouse, all right. You can imagine if you live at 2,500 meters and you climb regularly to 4,000 meters, you got a lot of red blood cells, so he's very acclimatized. But he's broken out his dress shirt from the thrift store here. He's a very, very well-attired guide, I thought. So back in Antigua, finally some rest. We went back to the hotel and straight to having a nap. Woke up in the afternoon, went up on the roof of the hotel and just hung out and enjoyed the experience, replayed it a bit, had some coffee. Guatemala's famous for its coffee. So yeah, a few things to get used to. We were in mid-range hotels, like budget hotels would be maybe $40, no more than $50, and hostels would be, a bunk in a hostel in a dorm would be probably $10 or $11, so quite a bit cheaper than a lot of countries. But this here is called, what the gringos call a suicide shower. So there's an electric water heater right at the shower head, so it's powered up and it's actuated by the water flowing through it. And they tell you, do not, under any circumstances, touch anything up there. And I just said Guatemalans are short, so it's not that far above your head for normal-sized people. So yeah, there's lots of stories of people getting zapped, and very few death stories, but lots of people getting serious shocks. The voltage there is only 110, it's not 220, so they probably live through it, but it's just a recipe for disaster. You're standing in a wet territory and you can see the wiring job is just, like I would do. A little patch of electrical tape. So something to be aware of at all times. So up on the roof here, it was coming up to the full moon, which figured into our plans for the next stop. But we walked around Antigua. The markets in countries like this are always an attraction. Just a little chaos. There's street scenes here, some of the population. So Guatemala's population is about 50% indigenous, the Mayans, descendants of the Mayas that built the ruins way back when. And this isn't a dress that they put on for tourists. This is the way they would dress, with these really intricate woven designs. And we've got a pro balancer here. So here's Natalie negotiating. The street vendors are actually probably the most polite ones I've seen in any country. They would actually take no for an answer. It was very refreshing. So we didn't mind chatting with them if we could. Not a lot of English is spoken in Guatemala, really, by and large. So here's one of the street vendors. They often sell the textiles, the blankets and the skirts and that. A young kid who goes along for the ride every day. And pretty exotic statue in the Central Park. So it's, there's obviously the Spanish colonization of Guatemala happened at the same time as the other countries down there, and so there's a lot of Spanish colonial architecture in various states of repair. This is a operating church, and it's really well kept up, but there's all kinds of earthquake and volcano decimated areas of Antigua that are kind of in ruins. So we toured one of the areas. It was an old convent that's been turned into a hotel and museum. So some of the Mayan artifacts here, replicas of them anyway. Not too many ruins. We didn't see any actual ruins. There are some in the area, but we didn't make that a focus. we were fixated on the volcanoes. There's a good example of a ruined church with a open air market in front of it. So this is a famous landmark in Antigua. It's called El Arco de Santa Catalina. So the left-hand side was a convent, and the convent was filling up. They wanted to expand to the site across the street, but part of the rules of this order of the nuns was that they couldn't be seen in public, so they built this covered walkway basically to get to the other side of the building there. But quite a famous landmark, and you always have to, you see people lining up the shot. The shot is to have the volcano framed in the arch. So another entertaining part in any of these countries is what they call the chicken buses. Pretty chaotic. We didn't actually ride any. We ended up going in pretty cheap passenger vans. So I think if you knew more Spanish, it would be a little easier to get around on these, because they would typically go to one town, then you'd have to switch buses, and drivers would be yelling at you, and your stuff would be on the roof, or may or may not be still on the roof. You might have put it on the roof. So yeah, if you knew what you were doing, you could ride for just a few dollars a trip. But we took the slightly more touristic route of taking these private shuttles. But they were still cheap. So we're going to leave Antigua and go on to a city called Quetzaltenango, one of those exotic ones that I had to visit. It means place of quetzals. Quetzal is a green bird, commonly mistaken for a finch, of course. So another early start to catch one of these shuttles. And then we had just hanging around waiting for the shuttle to catch us. Antigua is kind of it almost reminded me of some medieval city, because it had a lot of those ruins and it had cobble streets, and it really had a lot of atmosphere. So we ended up detouring that day. It was going to be a ride to Quetzaltenango, which is I think a 2 or 3 hour journey on the shuttle. We had a third world travel delay. We got part way, and we couldn't go any further because there was a political protest that had blocked the road. And it was supposed to last the whole day. So the driver took us to a town on Lake Atitlan, and that's the lake that I'd heard of years and years ago, surrounded by volcanoes. We had planned to go to it anyway, but just later in the trip. So we ended up spending about 8 hours hanging around there, which was no sacrifice, that's for sure, in a little town called Panajachel. So we got our first glimpse of the lake, and it's quite a famous one in Guatemala. There's the town. And really, really scenic. There's boats that go, it's kind of ringed by villages and towns, boats that go between the villages. So we had some street vendors come up to us, and we did intend to buy some souvenirs sometime in the trip, but this lady was talking herself down, really. You know, how about 400? How about 300? And we just, we weren't even putting the pressure on. We didn't really intend to buy, but we came to a good agreement on the price and bought this wall-hanging kind of affair. Her sales pitch was that this had quetzales on it, the green birds. And, she would say in Spanish, handmade, hecho a mano. And it actually could stand to be true in this case. Usually a street vendor tells you that, right, it's from China or something, but the people from the villages would come down and sell their stuff. And we saw lots of actual weavers in the market and that. So inexplicably, we're hanging out in the Central Park in Panajachel, and there's these dinosaur models. I have no idea why, because I'm pretty certain that no dinosaur tracks or bones occur in Guatemala anywhere, but I don't know, they look pretty cool, pretty lifelike. So there's the height difference. Natalie's 5'8" at the most. Now that woman does have bare feet, so give Natalie a half an inch or an inch for her runners. So the mission, one of the main missions out of Quetzaltenango, or Xela as it was called back before the Spaniards decided to rename it, was another volcano hike, and this one was tied into the full moon. So this one was even earlier. We got a 1 a.m. departure. We got picked up at the hotel. And Carlos, the guy in the yellow in the middle there beside Natalie, there's a driver, picks us up. Carlos is there and introduces himself as a guide. And then we pull up to some other house or whatever, and we wait and we wait. And Carlos is talking to the driver, and he's laughing, and you can tell he's saying something about what the guys are waiting for. And he turns around and asks Natalie, "So Natalie, how long does it take you to put on your makeup in the morning?" She goes, "Oh, about a minute." These guys, they're too busy putting their makeup on, they're late. Anyway, this is a police escort for this climb. The Guatemalan tourist police has a service where they'll join these guided trips and provide security. And this was the real deal. These guys had handguns, 9mm handguns, and the one guy on the right has his, uniform street shoes to hike up the volcano. So I've never ever gone on a hike with a police escort. So another pre-dawn start, but this time it was in full moonlight, so it was really, really beautiful. That's the lights of the city of Xela down there. It's about 200,000. It's quite a big city. So you get to the top. You can't really tell you're at the top that well because it's still dark, but the multiple attractions on this one are kind of like the Catanango hike. On the one side of the mountain you climb, below it this time, there's an active volcanic crater. And it's kind of the remnants, it's the rejuvenation of a 1902 eruption that basically blew the side off the mountain and even went as far as wiping out part of the town of Xela, or the city of Xela. And it's rebuilt itself, but it's quite active again. It erupts almost like Old Faithful every half an hour or so. So you hang out here and you watch that while you're waiting for the sunrise. So you can see it down there smoldering away, in the dark, especially when you get there in the dark, you can see red glowing lava, which, again, as a geologist and a spectator, I thought was just beyond cool. And another party was up there, another guided group of people mostly from England, I think. So here's the guide and the two policemen looking more like banditos to me. But we got a kick out of them because, they're dressed up heavily. But it actually was, I would say, +2 or 3. It was actually cold. I was actually on the verge of being cold. But these guys, this was like going to Antarctica for these guys. So yeah, we got to hang out, watch these regular eruptions, and then catch the sunrise. Lots of fog in the valley to make it really, really cool looking. And then between eruptions, the crater would just kind of smolder and steam and spit. Very impressive. If you look in the distance there, you can see a puff of smoke coming out of one of the mountains there. That was Volcan Fuego that we had been across from just like 3 days before that. So it was really cool to tie it together and see the two. But yeah, an amazing, amazing place to catch the sunrise. The other group there, they're pretty dressed up too. So then we saw something I've never ever seen in my life. The shadow of the volcano was being projected on the cloud layer below. That was, again, was icing on the cake for this one. Another perfect cone-shaped peak. So we goofed around. The policeman let me pose with their handgun. He took the clip out. He's not crazy. And then we walked down as it's getting nice and light and warm. It was actually really nice to have finished that off so early. And by the time we got to town again, it was 10 o'clock, I think. On the way down, there's some guys hauling wood, and that's the chief source of cooking fuel. We'll see later on in the show all about that. But yeah, it's not an easy life for these guys hauling wood all the time. And both the guide and the two cops started telling wood hauling stories, because they'd all done it as young guys. That was their job. And the guide later on said, I'm only 35, but my knees are kind of, I think they're kind of going. It didn't surprise me a bit. I mean, it'd be like backpacking every day with 60, 70 pounds. So here we are at the bottom of the hill. The cops are really fun. They actually were enjoying it rather than just having it as a duty. I don't know if that's better or worse than being a regular policeman in Guatemala. I suspect better. So we went back to our place in Xela. A lot of these budget hotels are converted Spanish colonial houses, so it has a central courtyard and the rooms are around the outside. And actually, because the city is quite high, it's about 2,400 meters. It gets cold there. There's no heat, no central heating, of course. And they say in the winter, it gets down to +5 or something. So again, something you don't picture in Central America, especially down in the valley where a few 100,000 people live. But yeah, quite nice. Of course, we came straight to the room and had about a 3-4 hour nap to try and catch up. And then wandered around the central square of this city. It's the classic Spanish colonial town where things are built around a central square. It's in the dry season. It's the tail end of the dry season. This was first 2 weeks in May. So we were really lucky with the weather because sometimes if the wet season came early, it could be actually kind of rainy. And some of the older buildings. We were going to visit the tour operator. It was a local Guatemalan company lining up our next trip. So we stopped at a bakery and found these. And it was only a couple of weeks after those crocodile tracks were found, so we thought that was pretty funny. So you have to sometimes have a strong stomach in these Central American markets. This was particularly hardcore. Flies everywhere on the meat, and the vegetable aisle was a bit more tame. So we're got stuff spewed out, packing for the next trip, which was a 3-day trek, and the idea was to leave pretty close to Xela and spend 3 days on the trail, staying in local villages, and end up at Lake Atitlan. Like I said, we had planned to go there later in the trip. So typical, these budget hotels normally have a shared kitchen, so we would just have the normal breakfast of hard-boiled eggs and bananas, and get on the road. Okay, so we're setting out for a 3-day trek across the mountains to Lake Atitlan. And we're lucky enough to get Carlos again as a guide, the same guy who had taken us up the Volcan Santa Maria in the moonlight. Really good guy, obviously a local, and he spoke quite good English, which really helped because really allowed us to connect with the people we met along the way, especially on this trip. So we got dropped off by a driver again and headed off. We got to the highest village, and then the idea was to cross that mountain range and another one and another one and another one, and end up for the night at a local village and stay the night in a village. So the same kind of thing through the jungle. We had sleeping bags and foam pads, and then just clothes and a bit of food. We took some of our own food. So we got high up. There's kind of a plain up there, an open plain that they call Alaska. I guess it reminded someone of Alaska, I don't know. But quite nice rolling, still a good agricultural country. And corn everywhere. So there's some settlement up here, and it was actually people that had been relocated. Guatemala tends to get torrential rainstorms, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, that kind of thing. So in one of these really, really heavy hurricane-fueled rainstorms, these guys got their village pretty well wiped out, so they were relocated up to this area. So some wood moving, this time by horseback. And these guys depend on the wood. If you don't haul your own wood, you're not cooking your tortillas. So it's a real subsistence economy. And that's the guy with the horse. He's packing wood too. And sometimes they'd leave those bundles of wood alongside the trail. They'd shuttle them and pick it up and move a couple at a time. And I tried to pick one up one time, and I swear it's at least 60 pounds. Like it's no joke. And they don't have $300 backpacks with cushion suspension systems either. The guy's got a top line and some rope. So we, like I say, went over hill, down dale, through some pretty rugged country on these footpaths. Most of these paths they're not hiking trails as such, they're trails between villages, trails that farmers use to get to their fields, that kind of thing. These are little patches of corn where the stubble has been burned. You can see in the background there some roads, if you can call them that, just one-lane dirt tracks that look like they'd be on the side of Roman Mountain for coal exploration or something really steep. So we stop along the way here, and Carlos reaches up in the tree and he grabs an avocado. So I've never seen an actual avocado tree, and it was just like a little smorgasbord on the afternoon there. Saw some limes. We saw this huge tree with hundreds and hundreds of mangoes in all stages of growth. And of course, coffee. Coffee's everywhere. And again, I don't think I'd ever seen coffee growing live. So this was actually a pretty tough day. It was, we had climbed, I'm going to say, a couple thousand vertical feet, then along, and then up and down, and then a long, long down, right down to that river valley we see there. And there was a last little twist of the knife kind of climb out of the valley at the very end, about 20 kilometers that day. So the river bridge here, in the rainy season, this gets wiped out. They just have to reestablish it every year. And we're greeted at the village we're going to stay in. So the tour company basically talks to people in these villages and says, you know, are you guys willing to host some gringos? We'll pay you a bit of cash, and you can, you know, as long as you have space and you can handle it, it's a good way to make a few dollars. So we were greeted by this dog and went to the place we were staying at. This is a very small village, maybe 100 people. And we were also greeted by Joaquin here, this slightly charming, slightly obnoxious little guy, pretty hyper. And his little brother, they were entertaining, but they wanted to play with our stuff and they wanted to bug us, but they were quite harmless. So we were put up in pretty well new but quite Spartan cinder block building here. And Natalie actually lucked out and got a bed. I slept on this 1/4-inch thick foam pad on concrete. And I tried to sleep, I should say. It wasn't the most comfortable, but I was tired enough. So we go to their cooking building. And the kids here, they're fending for themselves actually, because the father's out working on this road project. We met him later. And the mother was actually taking care of her mother, who was quite sick. It might have even been sort of deathbed sick at the age of 50, and as you can imagine, you know, life expectancy is fairly low. I think in Guatemala it's one of the lowest in Central America, so it's definitely a hard scrabble existence in these villages. This one had, you know, it had power, it had a road to it, but not a lot of niceties. So Natalie was pressed into service cooking on the wood fire here. We had brought some chicken and I think pasta. But the kids were into cooking as well. They were pretty self-sufficient. They made a little soup or stew, just chopped up some onions and tomatoes, and tortillas are the staple, as I mentioned. So this guy's chopping away. I mean, you know, in Canada, some kids, you know, cook for fun, you know, help mommy and daddy, but this is the real thing. They have to feed themselves that night. And this is what they had for supper. They had ramen noodles with these dried freshwater fish from the lake. And I didn't hear it, but Natalie heard that this guy was telling his buddy he was only going to eat half of it because he wanted to save half for breakfast the next morning. So, you know, not too nutritious. Pretty primitive sanitary facilities. You know, running water, but it was from a creek, and you know, we were advised not to drink it, so we didn't. They have some, you know, some water purification stuff. It's actually a pretty low-tech, almost like a giant flower pot. You put the water in, and it kind of filters through the unglazed porcelain. So pretty low-tech filtration, but I think those guys were just used to drinking the water. So here one of the guys, he's actually going to work the fields before he goes to school. They go to school. There's a little small school in the village, so I was pretty impressed at their work ethic. And there's the mother of the kids. She'd come back the next morning. Very friendly, but kind of reserved. You know, you could tell she had a lot on her mind. So we climbed out of that village. You can see the houses down on the bottom there. You can see a landslide scar there too from heavy rains at some point. Up through the village. We came out on a road here, and we actually ran into the road building project that the father was working on. Here they're loading these cinder blocks. And he was quite friendly. He thanked us for coming and staying in his village, and it was cool. But again, no English, just all Spanish, nodding. So we walked. It was a mixture of trails and small roads to the next village, Santa Clara. And that was where we spent the second night. And we came into a really nice family. My husband and wife and their two, roughly 19-year-old daughters. So they're in the kitchen. We got there about lunch. We got there quite early. And they're making tortillas for lunch, which is basically, they spend, I bet you, a couple hours a day making tortillas. And they're really, really good at it. So they asked if Natalie wanted to try, beckoned her up. And she actually pulled off a creditable one. That's the one on the stove there, the one that's almost round. The ones that are completely, absolutely round are theirs, of course. And they thought that was pretty funny. So I thought, well, I'm going to give it a shot. So it was a little tougher for me. I don't know. I don't have the secret. It was sticking to my hands. These girls were killing themselves laughing at me. I was glad to be entertaining, but had to be the butt of their jokes. They were chatting away in Spanish. And what a goof, I'm sure they were saying. So this family was coffee farmers, and so they had coffee in various stages of processing. This is, they soak the beans to get the hulls off them, or the cherries, I guess, to get the beans out of the cherries, and dry them in the sun, grind them up. So this lady's name is Clara. She's talking to Carlos there, and Carlos says, "So you want to buy some coffee, right?" I said, "Yeah." It was like as fresh could be. So we ended up with buying a pound of coffee for, I think, the equivalent of $3, which we were very happy. They were very happy because it's, more than they normally get for their coffee probably. But it was a real prized possession. I guarded it the whole way back and broke it out on special occasions. It didn't last, of course. But again, some towering gringos over the native Guatemalans here. So in the background there, right beside me, is kind of a cinder block low building. And that's actually a modern day version of a Mayan sauna. So they said, "Oh, do you want a sauna?" We said, "Sure." We had a nap first, and then we got up and had a sauna. So it's kind of like a bunker, but it was an amazingly hot sauna. It was just really, really good. So we had a really entertaining evening sitting around in the kitchen building, and again, not a word of English was spoken there, but we managed. Carlos was the translator, and we ended up, I don't know how it started, but we ended up singing the Canadian national anthem for them, and they sang the Guatemalan anthem, but the guy actually had to go get his school book, because this thing is really, really long. It has verse after verse after verse, so they didn't actually know it by heart. It was really entertaining. A couple of friends of theirs came over. So it was a really good way to see how the actual Guatemalans lived. It was nothing put on for the tourists. It wasn't, you're not staying with the richest family in the village or anything to be impressed. It's pretty well, that's the way they live. So the big thing at that village is it's right overlooking Lake Atitlan. And so that was our final destination, was down at the lake. But the thing was, again, get up early in the morning before sunrise and go to this overlook and see the sunrise. So we had to do that. So we're watching dawn break over the lake, a couple of the villages below. The one on the left is the one we're ending up at later that day. And Miguel, the father, he came up and he brought some coffee and some water, and he fired up some hot coffee for us while we waited, which was very much appreciated. But yeah, a first-class sunrise. And there was one other group of 2 people there that had taken a bus from the village down by the lake just to catch the sunrise, but otherwise nobody there. Here's my favorite shot of Miguel and his empty coffee cup, greening away. Walked back through the his own coffee plantation back to the village, and they cooked us breakfast and bid us farewell, and we thanked them profusely for letting us enter their lives there, and then we headed off towards the lake. So there's one of the farmers there hoeing his field. So this is a feature called the Mayan nose, or the Indian nose. So it looks like a profile of someone's face, and you can see the structure there is where we got the sunrise, right on top of the cliff there. So we're hanging out, and we'd stopped, and Carlos was explaining something, and we kind of hear this noise. This Guatemalan lady who looked to be about 70 breezes by us, like almost at a run. Just, oh my God, what was that? She's in bare feet, and this is a rocky trail, and she's carrying, I don't know what, probably 30 pounds or something, just whizzed by us. It's quite impressive. Better and better views of the lake here. And then Carlos stops us and says, "Look, finches." No, these are actually quetzales, which is, I think, the national bird, quite popular in a lot of Central American countries like Costa Rica. It's even actually on the Guatemalan money, which is named the quetzale. So we're working our way down, no big hurry. There was actually one pressing engagement we had because we had booked a room at a hotel that's down at one of the towns on the lake. And I was reading about their all-you-can-eat Sunday brunch. And it went till 2 p.m. And so that was one thing to keep in mind as we wailed down there. Because we'd eaten well, but lots of tortillas. No dried fish. We didn't partake of the dried fish. The boys they had their own dried fish, but they weren't sharing because I don't think they could. They didn't have enough. So the lake here, actually, the lake level varies quite a bit. There's no surface outlet. There's no river flowing out of it. It flows out through cracks in the bottom of the lake. And it's rising right now. There'll be an earthquake, and it'll open up new cracks. It'll drain for a while, and then it'll slowly rise. There's some Mayan settlement that's underwater by tens of feet, if not hundreds of feet, that's been found and excavated via scuba. So right now it's in a rising mode. There's a good profile of the Indian nose there. So we're back down to one of the villages. This is obviously easier wood to gather. I'm pretty sure that was done by vehicle. And San Pedro, there's a town called San Pedro. There's about 12 villages around the lake, and this was kind of a bit touristy, sort of like a low-budget hippie tourist hangout. It's one of those areas on the Gringo Trail that's popularized. Everybody talks about it, so they talk about it, and they go there, and they talk about that, so other people go there. So it's built up quite a low-budget tourism infrastructure there. So my race was to go down the lake to the next town, because that's where our bags got shuttled. We didn't carry all that we had with us. We got our bags shuttled ahead, so we didn't have to carry them on this trek. So Natalie went to the hotel and checked in, and went to the buffet, and I raced back to get the bags and then head up. So I'm in one of these tuk-tuks, these three-wheeled motorcycle things, to hopefully I can make it back for the buffet. And we did. It was a little lacking in selection, but what they did have a lot of was bacon. And I bet you I had a dozen pieces of bacon. So Natalie decided she'd have a sleep in. There's one more volcano that I wanted to go up right beside the lake called San Pedro Volcano. So it was another pre-dawn start, but it was coming off a good restful day after that buffet, so it wasn't too bad. And in this case, you arrange a guide through this, kind of a local town service, and the guide never showed up. So the guy who gave me a ride up to the trailhead on his motorbike, with no helmet, of course, he said, "Well, I'll just walk up the trail with you, show you where the bottom of it is, and then you're on your own." So I hiked to the top. Natalie must have known because it was actually kind of fogged in on the top. Didn't see too much off the top. Still worth doing though. Saw some creatures. But yeah, just a few glimpses of the lake and the surrounding mountains. And more action here. Nothing that'll really harm you. We didn't see any snakes or anything. So that's a view of San Pedro. Natalie's probably sitting on the deck right there at the hotel. And you can see across to the village of Santa Clara is perched up here, and the trail that we took looked stupidly steep. It was steep, but it wasn't too bad. On the way down, some coffee flowers. And it's a really nice spot to hang out. We didn't find it too hippie-ish, if you want to say. It was fine. People were just pretty low-key. There were some tourist services though. But we missed out on the chill mill. It's coming soon. 2006. It's got a ways to go, I think. But yeah, the hotel was actually run by some French Canadians, and it was still cheap. I think it was $35 a night, but it was reasonably nice, and it had a nice deck with a couple of hot tubs. So it was definitely a gringo hangout. And there's kind of a gringo end of town and then a Guatemalan end of town. So, more services, rentals and money changing, that kind of thing. There's an electrical safety poster here. He's immune to it, I guess. He probably touches the shower, I bet. And then the upper part of town where the Guatemalans live, away from the water.
Speed bumps?
Yeah. There's kind of like in Mexico, you see those cannonball-shaped speed bumps to slow you down. You can see a couple of political posters here. The politics in Guatemala are actually kind of sad in a way, and a lot of those Central American countries are the same. There was a civil war that went from 1960 to 96. And it was one of those classic right versus left. And, the right-wing side was backed by, the Americans and the CIA, coups and overthrows, and a lot of forced disappearances. The Mayan, the indigenous people took the brunt of all that. There were, I think in the Civil War, 200,000 killed. So it's a rough time in the country's history. But things have been better since 96. There's a peace accord done in 96. But yeah, most of those Central American countries have a tale pretty similar to that, unfortunately. So here's a gathering outside the church, showing some of that really nice local dress. Pretty safe to wander around, we felt. As I mentioned, Guatemala City is crawling with gangs, and it's really, really dangerous. But from what we read beforehand, what we saw ourselves, we weren't that worried. So there's a guy getting those little fish, probably. And we did see piles of them in the market, these dried little fish. They do not look all that appetizing, to tell you the truth, but it's protein. It's a nice street mural here. This was a midwife. I looked it up later. She is a woman strong like obsidian, it starts out with. And the local Guatemalans washing their clothes in the lake. Some people would swim in the lake. We chose not to. I don't think it's particularly clean. So we went back to Antigua, and because we had a good time at that hotel that we had been there first. We went back to there, so we're up on the roof again, rooftop terrace. So we had one more volcano before we went home. This is Volcan Pacaya. It's actually in a national park, and you have to go on a guided tour in a group to see this one. So we took the low budget trip on this. You could, sign up for a trip for $80 US or something from Antigua. The place we were staying at, the lady who ran it said, "Oh no, here I'll line it up for you." It was only $20, including the park entrance. So there's a group of younger budget traveler types. So it was quite a good tour, and the tour guide was quite good. It's one of these polished, I've done this tour a million times at the national park kind of thing, but he was good. So they have a really good support system here. They'll ride up with ponies. First they'll ask, does anyone want to rent a pony at the bottom? And nobody did. Everybody wanted to walk. But they'll ride up with the ponies part way up the trail. And they'll stop and say, "Okay, now does anyone want to ride a pony?" And a couple of the girls, and it's not that high up, but it's relatively high up. A couple of girls decided that they better hire a pony, so they rode the rest of the way on the horse. But yeah, very impressive fresh volcano. It erupts from time to time. It's not as continuously active as the ones we're close to, but still impressive. There's a pretty fresh lava flow from, I think, a year and a half beforehand. So fresh, in fact, that you can toast marshmallows on it. So the guide had a bag of marshmallows and the sticks. This is a big claim to fame here. And I was a little skeptical. I'd read about this and I thought, oh yeah, but is that like once every 10 years or is it real? But no, it was actually quite hot. Oh, he's made us some more here. Yeah, very fresh lava flow kind of butting up against previous lava flow that has trees on it. So back to Antigua, and one last stop before we headed home to the market, stocking up on hot sauce and that, and getting our fill of the culture. And yeah, we achieved the mission, got some good father-daughter bonding, and Natalie has an experience I think she'll remember. Thanks.